When HOA Karen called 911 on my housewarming, she didn't know my backyard was packed with cops from my own department. Picture this: a warm spring evening in Austin, Texas, 2025, the smell of barbecue wafting through the air and a yard full of off-duty police officers swapping stories over cold beers. Then, out of nowhere, sirens. Not because of a crime, but because Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, decided my party was a threat to her precious community standards. Spoiler alert, she picked the wrong house to mess with. Ever had an HOA or nosy neighbor overreact to your gathering? Maybe they banged on your door about a loud laugh or sent a passive-aggressive note about your lawn ornaments. We've all been there, or know someone who has. Drop your story in the comments, because this one's for anyone who's ever wanted to stick it to an entitled busybody. This is the tale of how one overzealous HOA president learned the hard way that not every homeowner bows to her clipboard tyranny, and how my housewarming turned into the neighborhood legend of the year. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mike Johnson, 50 years old, a police officer with 25 years on the force. After decades of rentals and cramped apartments, I finally bought my dream home, a modest suburban fixer-upper in Austin, just outside the jurisdiction of the local HOA. It's got a big backyard perfect for barbecues, and a porch where I can sip coffee and watch the world go by. I'd been in the house for barely a month when this all went down, still unpacking boxes and figuring out where to hang my old department plaques. The place felt like a fresh start, a reward for years of night shifts and paperwork. I wanted to christen it with a housewarming, nothing crazy. Just friends, colleagues from the precinct, and a playlist of classic rock to keep things mellow. Now, meet Karen Mitchell, the HOA president who seems to think her gavel extends beyond her actual authority. Karen's the type who'd measure your grass with a ruler and leave a typed violation notice if it's half an inch too long. She's in her late 50s, with a perm that screams, "I need to speak to the manager," and a habit of patrolling the neighborhood in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, like she's auditioning for a suburban dictator role. The HOA she runs, Sunset Pines, technically only covers about half the homes in our area. Mine isn't one of them. My property predates their bylaws, a fact I confirmed with the county records before signing the deed. But Karen doesn't care about pesky details like legal boundaries. She's made it her mission to enforce community aesthetics on everyone, HOA member or not, and she's got a reputation for stirring up trouble over nothing. Last year, she tried to fine a guy for painting his mailbox blue. The man wasn't even in the HOA. I'd heard the stories about Karen before I moved in. Neighbors warned me over beers at a local dive bar. "Watch out for her," they said. "She's got a sixth sense for anything fun and a speed dial to complain about it." But I figured I'd keep the peace. I'm a cop, not a troublemaker. I nod, I smile, I de-escalate. It's in my blood. So when Karen first rolled up in her golf cart a week after I moved in, eyeing my welcome mat like it was a federal offense, I stayed polite. "Good morning, ma'am," I said, leaning on my porch railing. She didn't smile back, just handed me a letter, on official Sunset Pines letterhead, requesting I remove the mat because it was visually disruptive. I chuckled, told her I'd think about it, and went back to unpacking. That was my first mistake, assuming Karen would take a hint. She didn't. Over the next few weeks, Karen escalated her campaign. Another letter about my barbecue grill in the backyard. Apparently it was unsightly, from her vantage point 3 houses down. Then a passive-aggressive email about my truck parked on the street, which she claimed was lowering property values. Each time, I responded calmly, explaining my property wasn't under HOA control. I even showed her the county records once, thinking facts might shut her up. They didn't. "This is about community pride, Mr. Johnson," she'd say, sniffing like I'd offended her delicate sensibilities. I started to wonder if she had a personal vendetta or just too much time on her hands. Either way, I wasn't going to let her ruin my fresh start. So, I planned my housewarming for a Saturday evening in April 2025. Nothing wild, just a backyard barbecue with burgers, a cooler full of drinks, and a mix of friends and colleagues from the department. I invited about 30 people, including a dozen or so cops I've worked with for years. We're a tight, knit group, the kind who've got each other's backs whether it's a tough call or a tough day. I figured it'd be a low-key night of laughs, maybe some bad dancing to Springsteen, and a chance to show off the new place. I even checked the local noise ordinances, because I'm not an idiot. Everything was by the book. What I didn't count on was Karen Mitchell, sitting in her living room with her binoculars and a burning need to assert dominance. Here's the kicker. Karen didn't just complain. She didn't knock on my door or send another one of her novels disguised as letters. No, she went straight for the nuclear option, calling 911 to report a disturbance at my house. She had no idea that the rowdy crowd she was snitching on included half the local police department, all of whom would recognize me the second they pulled up. It was the kind of miscalculation that could only come from someone so wrapped up in their own power trip they forgot to check their target. And when those sirens started wailing, Karen was about to learn just how badly she'd misjudged the situation. Stick around, because this story's about to get good. You're not going to believe what happened when the cops showed up, or how Karen's crusade turned her into the neighborhood punchline. Got your own HOA horror story? Share it below, and let's commiserate. This one's for everyone who's ever wanted to tell a nosy neighbor to mind their own business. It all began with a welcome mat, a cheap, cheerful slab of core that dared to say, "Home sweet home," on my front porch, apparently offensive enough to unleash the wrath of Karen Mitchell, Sunset Pines HOA president and self-styled guardian of suburban perfection, fresh off her first salvo, a letter calling my mat visually disruptive. Karen was already gearing up for round 2, and my Austin, Texas, backyard was about to become her next battlefield. This is how her petty crusade escalated, setting the stage for a housewarming she'd never forget. 3 weeks into owning my new home, I was buzzing with excitement. The backyard, a wide-open stretch of green, begged for a gathering, so I planned a housewarming for a Saturday evening in April 2025. Picture it: burgers sizzling, a cooler packed with drinks, and a playlist of Springsteen and Seger to keep the vibe just right. I invited about 30 folks, mostly colleagues from the precinct, plus a few old friends, ready for a night of laughs and stories. I wasn't throwing a rager, this was a chill barbecue to celebrate a milestone. But Karen, with her eagle-eyed surveillance, had other ideas. Her second attack arrived in my mailbox a few days after the welcome mat fiasco, another letter, this time targeting my barbecue grill. It was a standard propane model tucked neatly in my fenced backyard. Yet Karen deemed it unsightly clutter that threatened the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. I pictured her perched on a stepladder, binoculars in hand, just to catch a glimpse over my fence. The letter demanded I relocate the grill to an approved storage area, as if my backyard were her personal fiefdom. I fired back a polite email, reminding her my property wasn't under HOA control and that the grill was fine where it was. Her response, a sanctimonious note about shared community responsibility, as if I'd parked a rusty tractor in my yard instead of a grill. Karen's fixation on my backyard wasn't just a quirk, it was a pattern. Neighbors had whispered about her reign of terror. One got a letter for a non-compliant basketball hoop, another for unauthorized flower pots. None were HOA members, yet Karen acted like her bylaws were universal law. A quick search confirmed this as classic HOA behavior, targeting non-members with aesthetic complaints they can't enforce, hoping to shame them into compliance, a bank rate violations. My grill, like my welcome mat, was just her latest obsession, a symbol of my refusal to bend the knee. Determined to stay civil, I tried reasoning with her. After a third letter, this one whining about my truck parked on the street for a few hours, I walked to her McMansion, where a Sunset Pines HOA president sign staked her lawn like a royal decree. She answered the door, clipboard in hand, her smile as fake as her tan. I laid out the facts: my property predated the HOA, my truck wasn't breaking any laws, and I just wanted to live in peace. I even pulled up the county records on my phone, showing my lot's exemption. She barely glanced at them, sniffing. This is about neighborhood pride, not paperwork. It was like talking to a brick wall with a perm. I left, vowing not to let her spoil my plans. As the housewarming approached, I doubled down on keeping things above board. I checked the noise ordinances. Music had to stay below 65 decibels after 10 p.m. Easy enough. I asked guests to park in my driveway or along my property line to avoid clogging the street. The backyard got a fresh mow, the grill was scrubbed, and I strung up some lights for a cozy glow. This wasn't about defying Karen, it was about making the night perfect for my crew, the cops and friends who'd had my back through years of tough shifts. I wanted them to feel at home, to toast to new beginnings. But Karen was watching. From her golf cart, her living room window, maybe a hidden camera in my mailbox, who knows? Every move I made seemed to fuel her mission to assert control. Neighbors warned me she'd once called the city on a kid's lemonade stand for operating without a permit. A lemonade stand. If she'd go that far, a backyard barbecue was practically a federal crime in her book. I should have seen it coming, but I was too busy marinating steaks to realize she was plotting her next move. By the time Saturday rolled around, everything was set. The grill was fired up, the playlist was humming, and my backyard was ready to host a night of camaraderie. What I didn't know was that Karen, armed with her phone and a grudge, was about to make a call that would turn my housewarming into a neighborhood spectacle. She wasn't content with letters or lectures anymore. She was going nuclear, and she had no idea the disturbance she was reporting was a yard full of cops who'd laugh her complaint right out the door. Then the sirens showed up, just as my backyard barbecue was hitting its stride, burgers sizzling, laughter rolling, and Tom Petty's Free Fallin', drifting through the warm April 2025 evening. Red and blue lights flashed down my quiet Austin street. Karen Mitchell, Sunset Pines HOA president and champion of petty grievances, had finally gone full nuclear, calling 911 on my housewarming for a rowdy disturbance. She thought she was dropping a checkmate. What she didn't know was that my backyard was packed with off-duty cops, and her move was about to turn her into the neighborhood's biggest punchline. The housewarming was everything I'd hoped for. About 30 guests, mostly colleagues from the precinct, plus a few old friends, filled my backyard, sprawled across picnic tables and lawn chairs. The grill pumped out burgers and hot dogs, the cooler was stocked with ice-cold beers, and the string lights I'd hung gave the place a cozy glow. The music stayed low, well under the 65 decibel limit I'd checked to keep things legal. My buddy Dave, a sergeant with a knack for storytelling, was midway through a tale about a botched stakeout when we heard the sirens. Heads turned, but nobody panicked. Half the people there carried badges. Sirens were just background noise to us. Still, I felt a prickle of annoyance. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it. Sure enough, 2 patrol cars pulled up outside my house. I stepped onto the porch, burger in hand, as officers Ramirez and Chen climbed out, their radios crackling. I knew them both. Ramirez from a joint task force last year, Chen from precinct poker nights. They spotted me and grinned, already sensing this wasn't a real call. "Evening, Johnson," Ramirez said, adjusting his cap. "Heard you're throwing a riot out here." I laughed, gesturing to the backyard where my guests were still chuckling over Dave's story. "Yeah, it's a real crime scene. Want a burger?" Before I could say more, Karen appeared, marching across the street from her McMansion, clipboard in hand like a general brandishing a sword. Her tracksuit practically glowed under the streetlights, and her face was set in a triumphant smirk. "Officers," she announced, "thank you for responding so quickly. This gathering is a clear disturbance. Excessive noise, safety hazards, and illegally parked cars clogging the street. She pointed at a few vehicles along my property line, as if they were evidence of a cartel operation. I raised an eyebrow. The cars were parked legally and the noise was softer than her golf cart's engine. Ramirez and Chen exchanged a look, the kind cops share when they know a call's about to be a waste of time. Chen stepped forward, notepad out, playing it professional. "Mom, can you specify the disturbance?" Karen launched into a tirade. The music was disruptive. The laughter was unacceptable for a residential area, and the sheer number of people posed a potential safety risk. I leaned against the porch railing, biting back a grin. She was describing a barbecue, not a rave. My guests, curious now, started drifting toward the porch, beers in hand, watching the show unfold. That's when it clicked for Karen. As more of my colleagues stepped into view, guys like Dave, built like linebackers, and Lisa, a detective with a no-nonsense stare, she faltered. These weren't rowdy frat boys, they were cops, the same kind she'd just summoned. Ramirez, catching on, couldn't resist. "Ma'am," he said, barely hiding his amusement, "if this is a disturbance, I need to get invited to more of these." The backyard erupted in laughter, and Karen's smirk vanished faster than her community standards. Chen, ever the diplomat, walked the perimeter with Karen, checking her complaints. Noise. The music was barely audible from the street. Parked cars. All within legal limits, mostly in my driveway. Safety hazard. The only hazard was Karen's ego, now teetering on collapse. "Looks like everything's in order here," Chen said, snapping his notepad shut. "No violations." Karen sputtered, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. "But the community standards." Ramirez cut her off, polite but firm. "Mom, this is a private residence, not HOA property, and calling 911 for a non-emergency. That's a misdemeanor in Texas. You might want to rethink that next time." The real-world sting of that moment wasn't lost on me. Misusing 911 is no joke. Texas penal code slaps fines on it, sometimes worse because it ties up resources for actual emergencies. Karen, in her quest to flex her imaginary authority, had crossed a line. My guests, now fully invested, started tossing playful jabs her way. "Hey Karen," Dave called, holding up a hot dog. "You want to file a report on this bun? It's non-compliant with mustard ratios." The crowd roared and I had to turn away to hide my laugh. Karen, red-faced, tried to retreat, muttering about following up with the board. But the damage was done. Ramirez and Chen gave me a nod, climbed back into their cars and drove off, probably radioing the precinct about the night's best call. My guests returned to the backyard, the music kicked back on, and the party rolled on, now fueled by the absurdity of what had just happened. I stood on the porch for a moment, watching Karen shuffle back to her house, her clipboard dangling like a defeated flag. She thought she'd shut me down. Instead, she'd handed me a story my colleagues would retell for years. But this wasn't over. Karen's 911 stunt was about to spark a confrontation that would leave her squirming, and my housewarming would only get better from here. That's when Karen met her match. With the sirens gone and her 911 call exposed as a flop, Karen Mitchell, Sunset Pines OA president, stood on my Austin lawn, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The April 2025 evening air still hummed with the laughter of my housewarming guests, mostly off-duty cops who just watched her complaint crash and burn. I stepped off my porch, ready to put this bureaucratic nuisance in her place, and what unfolded was a takedown so satisfying it turned my backyard barbecue into a legend. The scene was straight out of a sitcom. Karen, her tracksuit wilting under the streetlights, faced a crowd of my colleagues, their beers raised like they were toasting her blunder. Officers Ramirez and Chen had already driven off, leaving her with no backup for her disturbance claims. I walked toward her, keeping my tone calm but firm, the way I handle rowdy calls on the job. "Karen," I said, "you just called 911 on a private party at my house, a party full of cops, my colleagues. Maybe you didn't notice, but I'm a police officer too." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, Her smug armor cracked. She hadn't known. She'd assumed I was just some guy with a grill and a welcome mat, not someone who'd spent 25 years upholding the law she'd just misused. Karen stammered, trying to rally. I was protecting the community, she insisted, waving her clipboard as if it held the Constitution. This gathering, there were cars, noise, people. It's unacceptable. My buddy Dave, leaning against the porch railing, snorted. Lady, the only unacceptable thing here is you wasting dispatch's time. The crowd chuckled, and I saw Karen's face flush deeper than the ketchup on my burgers. She wasn't used to being challenged, let alone laughed at. But she'd picked the wrong night to play suburban sheriff. One of the responding officer's words echoed in my head, misusing 9/11 as a misdemeanor in Texas, and Karen's call was as frivolous as they come. I didn't want to escalate things legally. Paperwork's not my style, but I wasn't about to let her off easy. Karen, I said, stepping closer, you called emergency services because you heard laughter and saw parked cars. That's not protecting the community. That's harassment. And my property. It's not under your OA's control. You've got no authority here. I gestured to my house, the backyard still buzzing with music and chatter. This is my home, and I'm not breaking any laws. My colleagues, sensing blood in the water, joined in with the kind of playful roasting only cops can pull off. Lisa, a detective with a razor-sharp wit, called out, "Hey, Karen, you gonna write us all up for drinking lemonade? That's a safety hazard too, right?" Dave piled on, holding up his plate. "Better check my burger for code violations. Might be too juicy for Sunset Pines." The backyard erupted, guests clapping and hooting. Karen's clipboard trembled in her hands, her community standards crumbling under the weight of her own overreach. According to HOA leader, HOAs have zero jurisdiction over non-members, and Karen's attempt to police my property was as toothless as her argument now. Desperate to save face, Karen tried one last deflection. "The board will hear about this." She huffed as if her HOA cronies could rewrite property law. I couldn't resist a parting shot. "Karen, you called the cops on a cop party. Guess you're the VIP of bad decisions tonight." The crowd roared, and she turned on her heel, speed walking back to her McMansion like a scolded kid. My guests gave her a mock round of applause, and I heard someone yell, "Don't trip over your golf cart." The confrontation was over, and Karen's power trip had been thoroughly dismantled. Back in the backyard, the party kicked into high gear. The music got a little louder, still legal of course, and stories about Karen's meltdown started flying. "Did you see her face when she realized we were all cops?" Lisa said, wiping tears of laughter. "Priceless." Dave raised his beer. To Mike, for throwing the only barbecue in history to get a police escort. Everyone cheered, and I felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about shutting Karen down. It was about claiming my space, my home, in a neighborhood that deserved better than her petty tyranny. As the night wound down, I stood on my porch, watching my friends laugh under the string lights. Karen's 9/11 call hadn't ruined the party. It had made it unforgettable. But the story wasn't over yet. Her stunt was about to catch up with her in ways she never saw coming, and my housewarming was only the beginning of her reckoning. But the real party started after Karen left, with her clipboard crusade crushed and her 9/11 call backfiring spectacularly. My Austin backyard barbecue roared back to life, louder and prouder than ever. It was April 2025, and Karen Mitchell, the Sunset Pines HOA president, had just learned her community standards held no sway over my non-HOA property. What followed wasn't just a victory lap. It was a neighborhood transformation, with Karen's downfall sparking a chain reaction that turned my housewarming into a suburban legend and brought a chastened HOA to its knees. As Karen slunk back to her McMansion, my guests, mostly off-duty cops, cranked the music still under 65 decibels because I'm not reckless, and swapped stories about her meltdown. The string lights glowed, burgers sizzled, and laughter echoed through the warm spring night. But the real fireworks came days later, when a local news outlet caught wind of the incident. "Oh, President calls 9/11 on cops housewarming. Guess who showed up?" screamed the headline, complete with a blurry photo of Karen clutching her clipboard like a shield. The story went viral, shared across Austin's social media with hashtags like fictional and #FafBackyardJustice. Neighbors I'd never met started texting me thumbs up emojis, and my inbox filled with messages from strangers who'd endured their own HOA nightmares. The media storm hit the Sunset Pines HOA like a Texas twister. The board, mortified by the negative press, called an emergency meeting and leaned hard on Karen to make things right. A week later, at a packed community meeting in the clubhouse, she stood before a sea of skeptical residents, her usual swagger replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. "I apologize for any misunderstanding regarding the recent incident," she read from a prepared statement, avoiding eye contact. "My intention was to ensure community safety, but I recognize my actions were misguided." The room buzzed with whispers. Nobody bought her misunderstanding excuse. A neighbor later told me she'd overheard a board member warn Karen that her presidency was on thin ice if she didn't shape up. According to Find HO law, property owners like me are protected from HOA overreach when bylaws don't apply, and Karen's stunt had exposed her power grab to the whole town. Back at my place, the housewarming's legacy grew. Neighbors who'd kept their distance, likely intimidated by Karen's golf cart patrols, started dropping by to introduce themselves. One couple brought a six-pack and a story about Karen fining them for a non-compliant birdhouse. Another guy, a mechanic, offered to tune up my truck as thanks for giving her what she deserved. The party hadn't just humiliated Karen, it had cracked open the neighborhood, turning strangers into allies. I decided to lean into it, planning a second barbecue a few weeks later, open to anyone who wanted to join. I figured if Karen's 9/11 call couldn't stop the first one, nothing would stop the sequel. The twist came when Karen showed up. I was flipping burgers in the backyard, now packed with neighbors and cops, when I spotted her at the gate, holding a store-bought potato salad like a peace offering. Her tracksuit was gone, replaced by a subdued cardigan, and her perm seemed to droop with her pride. I could have sent her packing, but that's not my style. "Karen," I said, handing her a soda, "no 9/11 calls this time, right?" The crowd chuckled and she managed a weak smile. My buddy Dave, never one to miss a shot, raised his burger. To Karen, our guest of honor, "Just don't dial anyone." The laughter was gentler this time and Karen stayed, hovering awkwardly but eating her potato salad in silence. It wasn't redemption, but it was progress. She'd been humbled, and I wasn't here to kick her while she was down. That barbecue cemented my place in the neighborhood. The welcome mat stayed on my porch, the grill stood proud in the backyard, and Karen's golf cart patrols became a rare sight. The HOA, stung by the bad press, started focusing on actual member issues, like fixing potholes, instead of harassing non-members like me. Neighbors began hosting their own gatherings, no longer afraid of a clipboard-wielding tyrant. My house, once just a fixer-upper, became a symbol of standing firm against petty tyranny, a place where community meant more than aesthetic harmony. Looking back, Karen's 911 call didn't just fail, it sparked a reckoning. She thought she could control my home, my life, with a phone call and a rulebook that didn't even apply. Instead, she handed me a story that'll outlive her HOA presidency, a tale my colleagues still retell at precinct barbecues. And yeah, 38% of residents dislike HOAs for exactly this kind of overreach per YouGov. But I didn't need a poll to know Karen's brand of entitlement was a losing bet. If you love this HOA takedown, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories of justice and laughs. Got a neighbor who'd try to police your barbecue? Drop your story in the comments. Let's keep the fire going.